Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. This is the very first video up on the channel. My name is Lord Caledonia, and today I'm going to take you through one of my favorite stories from history. Like all good stories, this one has Gauls, armies, cursed gold, and that is the story of the Gold of Tolosa. One of those things that when I first read about it years ago, it's kind of what made me get into history, and I felt like it was the perfect way to kind of start this thing off. So, from the beginning, those of you who don't know, in the ancient world, there was a group of people called the Gauls. The Gauls are a Celtic speaking people. They are related to current Celtic peoples, like those we would find in Wales or in Scotland or Ireland, the Isle of Man, Cornwall, all those kind of places. But the Gauls were much more than that. They migrated from somewhere in Eastern Europe, probably either like Poland or Ukraine, and they migrated west, all the way into like modern day France, Spain, and they were quite a varied people. They mostly spoke kind of the same language or dialects of it. One of my favorite bands, Helveti, they're a folk metal band. They do some songs in Gaulish, and there's a lot that has made it to modern day English. But the Gauls were very numbered, very diverse. And in the year 280 BC or BCE, kind of depending on who you are, the Gauls were led by a man called Brennus. This probably is not his real name, or it's probably a variation of that, maybe like Brennan or something very similar. But he kind of came from the west and started sacking places like Italy, like Greece, and in fact, Athens. Brennus hits them in about 279 BC, if memory serves, and he starts taking treasure, all sorts of treasure. At the time, most people in the ancient world were what we call pantheists. They weren't polytheists. So a polytheist is somebody who believes in multiple gods. A pantheist is someone who believes in every god. They might respect one set or one god over others. Something I want to talk about one day, but most everybody, including the Gauls this time, were pantheists, and they believed that their gods, the sort of Gallic gods, Celtic gods, were the best gods out there, and they didn't really fear other gods. The Greeks and the Romans, for instance, were very knowledgeable that people like the Egyptians kind of predated them and felt like Egyptian gods were kind of older, more of this almost like primordial force. But Brennus and his guys, they don't have any of those sorts of qualms, and he ends up taking a lot of gold, a lot of silver, priceless artifacts, art, slaves, from the Greeks, from the Athenians, and he takes it back with him when he goes back west. Why did he do this? Great question. It could have been a show of force, could have been just to have money. We don't really know. Ancient scholars can speculate, but the Gauls, while they did write some things down, unfortunately, we don't have a first-hand account of Brennus. But Brennus goes back and he takes the treasure that he's amassed and he takes it to a place called Tolosa. Tolosa is actually modern-day Toulouse, and he devotes the treasure he got to his gods there. And this was a story that was very passed around. As I said, the Greeks and the Romans knew about it, but they never forgot. See, everyone kind of remembered that a long time ago, the Gauls had a bunch of money kind of stashed away. Of course, it's protected by their gods now, but, you know, it was technically protected by, like, the Greek gods beforehand, and they didn't really do anything about it. So it kind of became this running theory that if you could lead a group of armed men legally into Tolosa, you could, like, steal the gold back. Of course, you would keep the majority of it, but you would donate, you know, a bunch to your local temples. And this kind of became every Roman boy's dream, that one day he might be the one to so graciously rescue this gold from these barbarians. Fun fact about the word barbarian, it actually comes from the Greek word barbaros, which was the way that the Greeks made fun of people like the Gauls speaking Greek, where it's kind of something they're going bar, 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 bar all the time. And that kind of became barbarian in English. If you don't know, ancient Greek has a lot of like small three-letter words in it. Gar is one of the most common, so it could have been that. I mean, who knows? Anyways, so as I said, this gets passed down, and eventually comes to a guy named Quintus Servilius Caepio in the classical Latin, or for today's purposes, Quintus Servilius Caepio or Capio. Doesn't really matter how you say it. Spoiler alert, he's been dead for a really long time. Now, Caepio, our dear boy, kind of inherits a unique situation in the year 107 BC, or BCE, and that is, he is now in charge of a force that is pursuing some fleeing barbarians, for the lack of a better word. I would have been descended from some of the people that Romans called barbarians, so, you know, it's the pot calling the kettle black today. But what had happened was a guy named Lucius Cassius Longinus, who was consul that year, so I'll go into it more in the future, but basically one of the guys controlling Rome. He had recently defeated a host of Germanic and Gallic barbarians, and they were kind of now on the run. And good old Quintus, good old Caepio, was put in charge of a pursuing force. So Caepio pursues them, and he and Longinus kind of chase them back. And a few years later, in 105 BC, because we're counting down from BC into the modern era, Caepio is dispatched to bring things under control as a consul. So, as I said, two guys rule the Roman government. They're elected every year, and traditionally one kind of stays home and one kind of goes abroad. And they kind of switch who's really in charge halfway through the year. It's kind of a really weird scenario. Anyways, so he is in what we now call Gallia Transalpina, which is just Gaul across the Alps, for those of you who don't speak Latin. And he's put in charge of them. And he gets a year, as I said, to kind of figure things out. And while he's there, he gets this idea. The gold's supposed to be here. This is where Tolosa is. What if I bring the gold home? I mean, I'll have to donate some back to, you know, the Roman treasury, and, you know, probably leave some at, like, the Temple of Jupiter, and I'll have to give some to my men. But that still leaves a lot of money left over, theoretically. If any of the stories he's ever heard growing up are true, he could make some serious money doing this. So, rationally, he decides he's going to look for it. And he does not find it, at least not for a long time, because the Gauls know that everyone wants their money, and they knew that this guy was coming to show up and, like, enforce Roman rules. And, you know, maybe he would take the money with him when he left. And so they hid it. Like, the Greeks should have all those years ago. They hid it extremely well. When Caepio gets there, all the idols to the gods are made of wood. Maybe they have a thin coating of brass over them, but they're practically worthless, except for as a collector's piece. And the days are, you know, ticking by. He's realizing he's not had that much more time. He realizes he doesn't have that much more time to actually get this gold and bring it home. because when a year is out, he's got to go back to Rome. He's done. You could ask for what they call a proconsular imperium. So imperium is where we get the word imperial from. It basically means they have control over life and death. Imperium, there's several stages to it, and like consuls have one of the highest stages, and you could get proconsular imperium. So like if you were consul and you were fighting a war against, like, I don't know, the Scythians or something, and you didn't think you were going to finish the war, but you might finish it in the next year, you could ask for an extension of proconsular imperium. This kind of gave you a little bit of power to kind of stay in the area and do what you needed to do. But ultimately, you were not a consul anymore. Someone would be put, maybe in charge of you. But, if you're a veteran at these things, they'll leave you to be. And Caepio's pretty sure that he's not going to get proconsular imperium to find the gold. After all, everyone wants to find the gold. So he is pretty sure at the end of his year, he'll go back to Rome, and one of the new consuls will come out here and try and find the gold. And the story goes that he one day is looking out over the lakes of Tolosa. I'll add an image here so you can kind of see maybe what he was looking at. And my guy's having a mental breakdown, basically. And he's looking out over the water, trying to figure out where this gold is. And the story goes that something glitters in the water. At first he thinks it might be a reflection, maybe a fish, but the longer he stares at it, it's not going away. And he gets this idea. What if we drained the lakes? See, years before, the Romans have been fighting a people called the Etruscans. I say years, but it was actually like a long time. And they were sieging a city called Veii, and they couldn't get into it. And in a very Roman version of the taking of the city of Troy, the Romans decide to drain some of the surrounding bodies of water and crawl through the sewers. And they figure out, hey, we can get in this way. And so Caepio utilizes some of that same thinking and drains the lake. And he finds a lot of money. Reports at the time say that it's something like 100,000 pounds of gold, as well as 110,000 pounds of silver. And all of a sudden, Caepio's kind of a rich guy. He has to donate some of that back to the state, some of it back to the gods, as I said. But ultimately, he's made for life. Even if he shares some of the money that he'll keep to his men, as would be customary, these guys aren't being paid by the state, they're being paid by the general, and they're beholden to some of that loot. And even if he pays them, he might live for life on this money. They might live for life on their money, depending on how well they invest it. But Caepio definitely will live for life. And he does what all good Roman consuls do, and he writes back to the Senate. And he tells the Senate, hey, we're having a bunch of money coming in. Roll out the red carpets. We're going to be rich forever. And he starts packing it up. Now, there are two ways that he could get this money back, and that is either over land or water. See, the problem with going over land is it is faster, but you have to deal with things like bandits, marauding war bands of Gauls, and possibly even desertion. Or he can send it back over water, and kind of, hopefully avoid bandits. Maybe pirates might be an issue, but the big issue is going to be the weather. And he wants to send the gold back kind of before his army. That way, when they get home, they can kind of get like their paycheck. The sort of imperial accountants would have already kind of gone over, everything, divvied it up for them, and then they would kind of take what was left for them. And so he sends it back. The nearest seaport to him is at a place called Massilia, which is actually modern-day Marseille, on the sort of southern coast of France, on the Mediterranean. He gets together his kind of best guys, and he sends them with a bunch of wagons homeward bound. And they never make it. And it's not like they disappeared with the money. They actually were found dead. And all the money was not there. They didn't have it anymore because they were dead. And the money cannot die because it is money. And immediately there was kind of a panic. Of course, a bunch of soldiers dead is a bad thing, but there's like a lot of gold that's missing now. And Caipio goes home, and his men go home, and no one gets any money. That was it for a while. Until it wasn't. See, this whole thing probably would have been a bigger deal at this time, except for Caipio got in some hot water soon afterwards. Not because of the money, but ironically, because of a bunch of Germans. See, there was a massive force of Germans kind of coming in. Part of that same force I talked about earlier, and they were fleeing what is now Denmark and northern Germany, and they absolutely defeated Caipio. The stories talk about 70,000 dead, and it was the worst Roman defeat since the Battle of Cannae, which had happened about a century prior, when Hannibal Barca of Carthage was kind of running around Italy, kind of doing whatever it was that he felt like at the time. Now, Caipio was put in a pretty bad place because of this. And in fact, when he returns to Rome, he is put on trial for this disastrous defeat because it was seen as something that he could have avoided, but because he was so arrogant, and maybe because he was wanting to repair some of that damaged reputation, he decided to engage in a battle he couldn't win. Now, these Germans were defeated not by him, but by Gaius Marius, who would have been like the next consul coming in. He actually would be consul 7 times throughout his life, crazily enough, even though there was supposed to be sort of a cool down period on when you could be consul. And Gaius Marius was kind of what people called a homo novus, a sort of new man, a poor guy who became a rich guy by being a soldier. And he was making the rich people look really, really bad. So when Caipio gets back home, he gets put on trial. And while he's on trial, people realize that Caipio is buying things that he probably can't afford. And people start to think, what if he took the money? Now, no one can prove anything, in fact, but they did strip away his imperium. So now he's just a normal citizen, a very rich, very, well-bred, normal citizen, but a normal citizen. And he's put on trial. Now, as I said, they can't prove that he stole the gold, but they can fine him for it. So what Roman IRS did is they basically stripped him of his Roman citizenship, sent him into exile, and they made a fine out in his name for exactly the amount of money that he would have gotten from Tolosa. About 15,000 talents of gold. Talent is a measurement of weight. You see it a lot in like the Bible. This money is equivalent to about $2,726,048 USD today per talent of gold. So 15,000 talents is something like $40,890,720,000 worth of gold, which we like to call a crap ton in the historical community. And Caipio accepts it. He doesn't pay the fine. In fact, even if he did, it wouldn't mean anything. He would still be stripped of his Roman citizenship, which means that he can't vote. He can't be a part of the Senate anymore. He can't technically, he was married, but he wouldn't be able to marry a Roman citizen. Any other children he had wouldn't be Roman citizens. But that doesn't really affect his living children. We'll get to that. And Caipio says his goodbyes. He He kisses his wife goodbye, kisses his children goodbye, and he tells them, don't ever worry about money. If you ever need any money, you just write to me, and I'll be in Smyrna, or Smyrna. Smyrna is how the Greeks would have pronounced it. Anyways, it's in Anatolia today, so that's cool. And Smyrna was kind of a very rich retiree place. Kind of imagine places that expats go to now and they have a lot of money. Smyrna would have been like the cream of the crop, you know, the real. I'm not rich, so like Bahamas maybe. I don't really know. And he leaves. He goes away, and he's right. His children don't need any money, and the funds kind of get passed down through the family, down to a woman eventually named Servilia, who some of you might know as being one of the lovers of Julius Caesar, and her child Brutus, Marcus Junius Brutus, or Marcus Junius Brutus, who, if you know your Shakespeare or Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, killed Julius Caesar. They were all incredibly rich. In fact, Marcus Junius Brutus, or Brutus as I will call him, as everyone else calls him for all of eternity, for all of time, he kind of becomes sort of a gambling loan shark, sort of like a modern day mob boss or Scarface. And he theoretically, because again, this is all alleged, no one actually knows, but we actually all do know. We're just pretending like we didn't because it's never been proved in court. That Brutus had this money and he was using it to loan to people and sort of maintain his wealthy lifestyle. But there's something about this gold. See, when the Gauls stole it a long time ago, they, as I said, didn't want it to get stolen from them. They learned from what the Greeks had done wrong. And one of the things the Greeks had done wrong is they hadn't cursed the gold properly. And the Gauls placed a lot of curses on this gold. Curses that said things like, you and all your descendants, if you were to steal this gold from us, would all die a horrible death. And probably other less specific things. And it kind of held true. I mean, Caepio would die in exile, stripped of his Roman citizenship. And, you know, maybe he was rich till he died, but it's not like he could ever go back home and do anything. It's not like he was sort of the first man in Rome anymore, a title that was given to people who did a lot of really good things for the city, or at least good from a Roman perspective. And he was overshadowed by people of the time, people like Gaius Marius, people like Sulla who would come in after him, Pompey, Crassus, Caesar. Servilia would die lonely without either Julius Caesar or her son. She would outlive both of them. Brutus himself would die in the civil war following Julius Caesar's death. By all accounts, he died very, very young, and whether or not you or any ancient author agreed with him, many people saw him betraying a father figure like Caesar was kind of a death warrant of his own. He had gone against the sort of laws that the gods had made for the world about family. And with his death and not leaving any children behind, the gold disappeared. Now, who knows what happened to this gold? As I said, everything is basically alleged at this point. No one knows if Caepio stole the gold. No one even knows if Brutus would have had it, even if he had stolen the gold. But people suspected. Cicero, in one of his letters, talks about how he personally always thought Caepio was guilty. And I think Cicero is probably a smarter guy than I am today. And if you look at a lot of Cicero's other letters, they're not as clean cut as some of his speeches are, which maybe shows that it's more of his actual private thoughts. And that's it. The gold's gone. The supposed cursed gold is gone forever. So if you are on a archaeology trip in Anatolia and you find, you know, $41 billion worth of gold, probably don't take it. In fact, there's probably a way that you could return that to the city of Toulouse today, and maybe you wouldn't be cursed. And that's all I have for you today. I'm hoping to kind of get this one edited and shot out the door. I apologize for the bad camera, the bad audio quality. This is kind of my first rodeo doing this, and I'm hoping to have kind of things upgraded a little further on down the way. And I should have a video to you guys soon. So thank you for watching, however many of you there are. I absolutely 100% appreciate it.
Hey, this is editor me, realizing that I had forgotten to talk about Caipio's son, Servilia's father. His name was also Quintus Servilius Caepio, and he too would die pretty tragically. He was killed by a bunch of Marcomanni Germans, I believe, in the aftermath of a pretty bad battle for the Romans, and he died very much not missed by the world. So my point in this video still stands.